Good afternoon. My name is Judge Karimu F. Hill Harvey, Chair of the Sarasota County Bar Association Council for Diversity and Inclusion. I would like to thank our viewers and the panel for attending and participating in this town hall, Policing Our Community, Building Trust and Confidence. The recent death of George Floyd and the protests have triggered the Sarasota County Bar Association and its Council for Diversity and Inclusion to stand in solidarity with demonstrators across the nation. And we speak out against systemic racism that is pervasive in our society. We are committed to promoting and encouraging meaningful law enforcement and criminal justice reform and a better understanding of the issues. Today's conversation is another step in that mission. Our next town hall will be on August 21st, entitled Silence is Not an Option. Finally, before I introduce our moderator, I want to remind you that the Sarasota County Bar Council for Diversity and Inclusion remains committed to providing scholarships to deserving minority law students and to graduates of the Booker High School Law Academy. We were honored to receive a $50,000 challenge grant from the William Muirhead Charitable Fund at the Community Foundation. Please consider making a donation. Any amount will help us. Also, we would like to thank the Sarasota County Bar for donating Panera gift certificates to those first 100 registrants to this town hall. And with that, I will turn the program over to Renee Gilmore, our moderator.
Thank you so much, Judge. I'd like to say thank you so much for having me. And I certainly don't need to tell you all that we all recognize these are very difficult conversations to have, but we cannot move forward without having them. So I applaud the Bar Association for opening up this forum. I want to introduce our panelists. Most of us on this call or on this Zoom meeting, I'm sure know these individuals because they have been out in the community in the thick of things for a long time now. I'd like to introduce first Colonel Kurt Hoffman, who is with the Sarasota County Sheriff's Department. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to introduce Chief Bernadetta DePino. Hello, Chief.
Hello.
Would like to introduce
you as a police officer drives by. A moment later, the patrol car is gone and Aliyah goes back to playing basketball. The video was captured by the family's home security camera.
It's shocking. I watched it like 3 times. I couldn't believe what I saw. I asked why he did what he did. He replied because they killed George Floyd.
Dad Cece Pierre Lewis was stunned and later shared the video to Instagram, writing, "Why does he feel like he has to hide when he isn't doing anything wrong?" He noted Aliyah doesn't see the news and they don't talk negatively about police at home, adding, "I didn't know what and still don't know what to say to him to make it better."
We tried to shelter these kids, right? But it's inevitable. You can't keep them from every screen. You can't keep them from every play date, right? They know what's going on.
Pierre Lewis soon found out his post resonated with more than just a few parents. The clip now has hundreds of thousands of views and has been shared across social media, starting a dialogue about what it's like to raise a Black child today.
It opened up the chance to have these uncomfortable but necessary conversations with our kids.
The video even caught the attention of NBA star LeBron James, who tweeted, "Breaks my heart," a welcome surprise from Aliyah's favorite basketball player.
It's crazy, huh?
Pierre Lewis says he was initially hesitant to post about what happened. Now he's hoping his family's experience can help bring people together and make a positive difference.
I think that's very much necessary. And I hope that this ends up on the right side of change.
I'd like to start with the civilians, if you will, on this panel. Wanda, let's start with you, please. You're a parent and you've also been on the police force. Your thoughts about that video. What are you thinking when you see that?
It breaks my heart. And he's hiding from a bully. That's what I get out of that. It really breaks my heart that he's hiding from a bully, and that bully is the one that's supposed to help him. that's really serious. And that video, in fact, it says a lot as to where we are right now.
Thank you. Michelle?
So it's obviously heartbreaking. And I think the one thing that stands out to me is that it signals the need for the serious conversation that we're having today. And, you know, we talk about defunding police, doing this. I always think about, we have to reimagine our relationship with law enforcement, the community's relationship with law enforcement, and law enforcement's relationship with the community. Because if this young boy feels like he has to hide, that relationship isn't working. The way we have it right now, it's not working. So instead of pointing fingers and blaming one another and you didn't do this and you didn't do this or you're not listening to me, we have to have the hard conversations and do the hard work to rebuild and reimagine those relationships, so that when another young Black man sees law enforcement ride by, it's a wave and not an initial hide behind a car.
Chief DePino, let's go to you, please. When you see that, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's funny, it's already been said, and it was tweeted by the basketball player. It broke my heart. It was so upsetting to see that, because it's exactly the opposite of what we want to have as a relationship with young people in our community. And I will tell you, our agency reaches out to young people all the time, from doing Shop with a Cop events at Christmas to handing out books to participating with the Boys and Girls Club. But this is obvious from this video, is that we need to do more to engage with young people and also have relationships with the parents in the community, so that we can educate about what our relationships are and make it positive. And I just got to share a real quick story with you. Sometimes I'll see parents, when I used to work in Ocean City, Maryland, and I'd be on the boardwalk, and parents would point to me and say to their children, "Hey, if you're bad, I'm going to call the police and they're going to take you to jail." And I would say, please, to the parents, please don't say that. We're here to help. We're here to help. And I would then deputize the child. I would give them a badge and ask them to wear their seatbelt. And if they ever needed help, is to come and find a police officer in uniform, because that's our job. But it's just heart-wrenching to see that.
Looking at that young man, if you could say anything to him, what would you say to that particular young man?
I would go and I would just have a conversation with him and please ask him not to be afraid of police officers. And I would tell him my name. I would actually go down on my knee to his level, have a conversation with him, and say what a good basketball player he was, and that if he needed help, I was here to help him. And I understand from after that video that there were police officers, at least one that I know of, that went to the house and had a conversation with the young man. And I think that's what we need to do, is we get to know each other on a personal, human way. And then that's where the trust and the relationships come in. And we can do it one person at a time. And I would wish that I could go and give them a hug and say, "I'm so sorry. Please don't feel that way. Not all police officers are bad. We're here to help you. We care about you."
Thank you. Colonel, what would you say to the young man?
Well, first and foremost, I've experienced what the chief was talking about, with parents saying, they're going to come take you away. So we've got to be able to engage with our kids on a more personal level. And what I would say to that young man is exactly what the chief said. You've got to sit down and engage in a conversation. You got to do it on their level and let them ask you questions and interact with them. But I will tell you, judging by the age of that child, that's not just at that age. We interact through our Sheriff's Activities League with kids that are all the way up to 18, 19 years old. And you get a similar reaction sometimes when you initially engage them in activities. We have a seminar that we do here called Rightful Policing Seminar, where we bring the kids in. They come in on a scat bus here, and we actually exchange roles with them. They get to play law enforcement officers for a day, and we get to play kind of the traffic stops and the domestics and that kind of thing. But the most important part of that day, to me, and we put about 800 kids through it now, is the debrief at the end of the day and the change in the attitude from my employees and from the kids when we've had an opportunity to sit down and have lunch together and talk about, they said, well, we didn't know you had to go through all that kind of training. We didn't know people acted like that. And I said, well, we didn't realize some of the things that we were saying or the way that we were interacting could be offensive or could be, interpreted the wrong way. So every single time we have one of those interactions, I leave with more information than I came with. And I want to continue to do that. So I think what I would say, Renee, is every opportunity that we have, whether it's one kid, a group of kids. I participate in the Booker Law Academy, as do many of my detectives that the judge mentioned before we went live. Those kind of events are where you get to sit across the table from people and have those one-on-one conversations. You're not going to do it by a website or social media or an article in the paper. You've got to look the people in the eye and understand the perspectives of where they are coming from. At least I think that. For my detectives who debrief and tell me afterwards, and I listen to what they say, and we learn much more, I think, than even the kids are learning. So you got to have the personal interaction. And I'll just say one more thing on that. You sometimes in law enforcement, we get too caught up in the policing side of things. We have a very robust community affairs unit here, and they're always coming to me with ideas, whether it's community events, open house, national night out, all of these events. And I rarely say no to any of those because I think policing has transformed from actual cops and robbers on the streets to engaging with our community, and that's not over policing them, in my opinion.
Thank you for that response. I want to follow up on that. If there has been a shift, a change, going from policing to being more inside the community, why do we continue to see so many incidents on camera of Black individuals being subject to excessive force? I want to start with you, Wanda, please.
Thank you. And I wanted to comment to that when both chiefs, they talked about really good ideas and things that they did with the community. But one of the things as a recommendation that I would see is that by looking at that video, the first thing I would do is take that video back and start speaking with the officers before they go out to roll call. The change has to start there because the community has entrusted you with that power. By coming in, and I did community relations, community involvement, but it has to be a real structural effort. Coming in and having a feel-good session, but it has to start with those officers and reset the culture as to how we're going to change that. And that's what really needs to happen. We got to change that, and the onus is on the department. That's where it needs to start. And back to Renee's question, because when you move out to the Black community, even myself working for 30 years, use of force is a last resort. And from what we have seen, and both chiefs, you see this, anytime you respond to a Black person, the first thing that I've seen, which makes me, I don't understand it, you pull your weapon out. The first thing comes, the weapon comes out. And I know that is not what they are taught. Most of them are taught last resort. In all of the departments, from that have to go through diversity training. So they're used to this. I think the change is going to have to come from looking at this video. It's going to have to start with you to get back to them. And it's going to have to come from the department out to the community.
Michelle, please, your thoughts about why the excessive use of force tends to end up being subjected to African Americans, particularly men.
Yeah, so I think that, Wanda's point is spot on. It's the culture. And, John Morgan, the lawyer John Morgan, he tweeted, he said, you could have, 1,000 good cops and you can have 10 bad good cops or 10 bad cops. But if the 1,000 cops don't turn in the 10 bad, then you have 1,010 bad cops. Mm-hmm. And I think it comes down to the culture. And I have not had the pleasure of working with Chief DePino or Colonel Hoffman, but I've had the pleasure of working with Sheriff Chronister in Hillsborough. And one of the things that I love about him, if I call him and I say, hey, Sheriff Chronister, this is what's happening, this is what's gone on, I immediately get a phone call back. He immediately investigates it. It's not a question. He has fired folks. He has let them know we're not having it. And there has to come, the culture has to be a zero tolerance policy. A zero tolerance policy for any type of behavior that goes against that's not equitable, that's not just, that's not equal. And so I think that when you start having folks who are leading these departments, who are leading these offices saying, we have a zero tolerance, you can get mad at me if you want to, but you're not going to do this on my watch. And if I find out about it, then that's a problem. That's when even we started to see the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department changing when Sheriff Cronister came in and said, I have a zero tolerance policy for it. And if I find out about it and it's substantiated and there's evidence showing that you have done these things against policy and procedure and against the standard operating procedures and against the culture of our organization, you're gone. And I think that when you start having that puts that trust. But when you have folks that, there's other agencies in the Bay Area that doesn't happen with. They know it, there's evidence, and it gets swept under the rug. So if it keeps getting swept under the rug, you know that you can act out, you know that you can do things, and you're not going to get in trouble for it. Unless, it becomes so egregious that it becomes a PR nightmare, then that's when we're going to act. But I need law enforcement to act when it's not a PR nightmare. I need law enforcement to act when nobody really knows but you, me, and the officer what's going on. And so I want to just ask to her point, it's the culture. It is the culture. The culture has got to change. There's got to be where good cops feel like they can say, you know what, you're messing up. And I'm going to the chain of command. You can be upset with me, you can be whatever, but you make me look bad. You make me, put me in more danger when you don't do what is right.
Thank you. Colonel Hoffman, I'm going to ask you, given that your last response was about the kinds of things that you do to try to close the divide, if you will, given that, why are we still seeing a disproportionate number of African Americans being subjected to deadly force and abuse?
Well, I think, Renee, that is happening across the country. That's undisputable. But I think we have to look here locally at our numbers here. So since 2009, we have tracked through our strategic plan, which I have a copy of here if anybody wants it off of our website. We track those use of force numbers and we voluntarily report those to the FBI when somebody is injured, when a weapon is drawn, or when a weapon is fired. You don't have to do that. But we've been doing that since 2009, since Sheriff Knight took office. And if you look here locally, our internal affairs cases have dropped 61% since Sheriff Knight took over. Now, I want to kind of back up because Wanda and Michelle beat me to the punch. But the word we need to talk about here is culture. And I'll even go one step further than what Wanda said when she said you need to get your officers to understand the culture. You need to get your applicants to understand the culture. You need to take it one step back and make sure that you're hiring the right people. So I mentioned to you rightful policing and the concept that we have here of rightful policing. I personally am the rightful policing instructor for my agency. Every single new employee, civilian or sworn, because remember, you have dispatchers, you have public service aides, you have animal service officers. These are folks who are interacting with the community too, and they wear a uniform. It might not be a green uniform. But in that rightful policing context that we have been teaching since 2016, Dr. Tracy Mears, if you want to look up the concept out of Harvard University, she calls it procedural justice, but essentially rightful policing since 2016. We've seen those internal affairs cases go down. We've seen those use of force cases go down. And we teach it at new employee orientation. We built it into our internal leadership academy that we created here, Renee. So every one of my new supervisors, I don't give them stripes for their uniform or collar brass like I'm wearing and make them a supervisor and say, go be a supervisor. They've got to be trained on culture and what is acceptable. Because as Wanda pointed out, now they have a squad of 10 or 15 or 20 employees that they're responsible for. When I'm home sleeping at 2 o'clock in the morning, those sergeants are the ones that are policing the police and making sure that we're reporting those folks. So what are the bellwethers there? Well, it's the internal affairs complaints, which are down significantly. The use of force complaints, which if you look at ours, and we report those through our accreditation agency as well, which we received 100% accreditation, those numbers have dropped extensively. So I say all that, Renee, to say in Louisville, St. Louis, Oakland, Fort Myers, obviously Minneapolis. That culture has not been changed by the leadership of that agency. And to Wanda's point, I use a whole series of videos when I teach rightful policing. Sandra Bland, George Floyd is plugged into my next one, and I'll use this one as well because they've got to see real life examples of how people are being treated. And I will tell you, for anybody that's listening to this that thinks that this is not occurring in America in 2020, you need to read the Ferguson police report that the DOJ put out, Eric Holder and President Obama's administration, and read what occurred in Ferguson, Missouri. When I read this, to think in modern day policing that this could still be systematically happening from one end of the agency to the other without any accountability or any attempt to change culture, it just reinvigorated me to go out and teach these rightful policing classes and make sure, as Michelle said, you hold folks accountable. I have put internal affairs in our agency directly under me. I didn't assign that to a lieutenant, a captain, anybody else. Every single one of those cases come across my desk. And I know Chief DePino does the same thing because she looks at all those we talk about that. So the culture, you are right. And I'll tell you just one real quick thing too, back to the applicants. We've just recently found a implicit bias applicant tool that I think is going to help us even weed out a few more folks that have that implicit bias on the front end that we don't even want into this agency. We are one of the few agencies that have maintained you must have a college degree, you must have 3 years of law enforcement experience, or you must have a military commitment with an honorable discharge. Those are the 3 ways that you come to the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office. If I'm hiring like some of these agencies, just people who off the street or they've got a prior issue at another agency, that's not what we're going to have here. And one other bellwether, if you look at the retention of our agency, our retention rates are higher than the county, state, and national average. It means our employees are staying. They're getting our culture. They're getting our training. So I think everything that Wanda and Michelle said is on point, but it is squarely on my shoulders to make sure that we follow through with that.
Thank you, Colonel. Let me ask you, Chief DePino, your response, please.
Yes, thank you. First of all, every single life is valuable. And I think it's important that in our culture in law enforcement that which sometimes traditionally has had this warrior mentality as opposed to a guardianship mentality. And we have to look at our community as we're here to protect people. So that's why it's so important to make sure that we are, number one, training our police officers in the culture that Wanda was talking about. And I also personally train every single police officer that comes into our agency. I also interview them when I'm hiring them, but I also teach them community-oriented policing and problem solving and how to engage with the community and build relationships and trust. And I shared with them my own personal stories of things that I've seen that have happened where law enforcement didn't act appropriately and have those expectations for our department. So absolutely, it has to be a culture within the organization, and because every single life is important. Every single person we engage with within the community should be treated with dignity and with respect. And I tell our officers is you need to treat people that you're dealing with, whether it's a traffic stop or you're going to make an arrest, as if it was somebody in your family that you loved, because it could be your family member at one time that law enforcement somewhere else is dealing with, because it could happen to any one of us. So it's important to make sure that that culture starts with me and then moves its way down. And I make sure that I have the right people in positions below me, especially good sergeants and good field training officers. And then you go to the hiring, and I'm like Colonel Hoffman, I look at making sure we're hiring the right people with the right mentality. And that's why I personally interview them and I ask them that question. This is before Mr. George Floyd was murdered. I asked them the question, would you have the courage to be able to interfere if you saw a police officer doing something illegal, immoral, unethical? Would you have the courage to do that, knowing that you could have your peers maybe not standing up for you? And every single one of them said, yes, they would. Now, somewhere along the way, where did that drop off? And we have to make sure that we look at making sure officers have that moral courage to step up and report things. It's actually in our policy. It's been in our policy that our officers have a duty to intervene if they see someone acting inappropriately, using policy inappropriately, or acting illegally, using excessive force. They have a duty to act. And making sure we hire the right people. See, I believe we need to mirror our community in diversity. And I'm proud to tell you that as chief in the last 8 years, I've hired more diversity than the last 5 chiefs combined, to make sure we bring more women, more African Americans, more Hispanic, more Asian officers to our police force, because indoctrinating officers into our force that mirror our community, it does a couple of things. One, it gives the community a trust that there's people that look like them that they can engage with within the community. But it also educates police officers that they have experience with other police officers that don't look exactly like them, and they build relationships, and that breaks stereotypes, that gets rid of bias. And I'll just end with this, because there's so many things we're doing at SPD, and accountability is the biggest thing. I am not scared to fire someone. I will if I see someone acting inappropriately, and I have. And I will continue to do that. But we have to make sure our officers are held accountable for what they do every single day, and make sure that officers feel comfortable and they can come forward, and that we are going to do the right thing when the people come forward, and especially with the community, because we have a civilian oversight. We have an independent police advisory panel and a police complaint committee that reviews every single the internal affairs investigations that are brought to our police agency, and they are able to give me feedback as to they agree or didn't agree with what I did, and that gives me a chance to explain to them why I made the decision that I did. And again, our independent police advisory panel, we were reviewed by them using President Obama's 21st century policing, where we had the 6 pillars, and when they came back with their review, they said we were following the first 5. But the 6th one, which is dealing with officer wellness and safety, was one we need to work on. And we need to work on that in order to make sure our police officers' mental health, their spiritual health, and their physical health is being taken care of. Because if not, they are going to take those pressures and stresses and then put it out to the community that they're serving in a negative way. So we need to work harder to look out for our police officers when it comes to those things. And again, just ending with, we've got to make sure the culture of our agency doesn't allow excessive force, doesn't allow inappropriate language, doesn't allow inappropriate behavior, and then holds the officers accountable. But we have to have good people in place to make sure that that's done.
Thank you. Michelle, I want to ask you a question. Given all that's going on, let's say between what's happening right here in our own local area, why does there continue to be a disconnect? We're still having incidents despite all of the work that both of these law enforcement professionals are describing.
I think that the relationship or the relationship that we have with law enforcement wasn't built in a day, right? And whether that relationship is good or bad, it wasn't built in a day. And there's a lot of work that has to be done. And I think that I applaud the chief and the colonel for the work that they're doing. But I think that there's just been a lot of mistrust. You have to understand that, and I always take it back, I'm a history buff, so I always take it back to even the inception of what we know as modern day policing. Modern day policing was built on the foundation of slave catching, hunting Black folks. So that is the modern day that is the foundation for the modern day police force. And then we go to where the police were used to chase Black folks out of towns at sundown. Then they were used as an arm of, white supremacist racism and KKK. So you have all of these tentacles, right? And so we can't expect that, we're going to implement certain things and it's all going to be fine. We have to get to that root level. And I think what happens is there's not a one size fits all, right? We've seen in Camden that they've reduced their police force and it's more community policing. And that's what I think, honestly, the model should be. And I think that is where I hear Chief DePino and Chief Colonel Hoffman going into that community policing model, because I don't think that there's anyone now in 2020 that's like, yes, let's terrorize Black people. And if there are some folks that do, but I don't think in our community, I don't think that's what's happening. But you have to understand that even when law enforcement has harmed Black folks and brown folks, they've seemed to be able to get away with it with no repercussions. So there's a lack of distrust. So even when there has been these wonderful things that are happening, you have people that are looking and saying, well, that's great that you guys are doing this, but Breonna Taylor's killers are still walking around, without, and they're cops, we're seeing other folks that have other concerns with what has gone on in some in the departments here and other departments where they feel that there has been no accountability. So I think that it's really kind of unpeeling all of these layers, of unpeeling the foundation and the history. And then also when a law enforcement officer is wrong and breaks the law, just like y'all would arrest me and charge me if I broke the law, that same thing needs to happen. And maybe even at higher standard because you are a law enforcement officer. And I think when people start to see that that law enforcement officers are going to be held to the same standard, if not higher than a civilian, people may start to get comfortable like, okay, so they really are gonna put their money where their mouth is. Because it's easy to say that, but when you know things are going on and folks may not be held accountable, that still breeds that lack of trust.
Thank you. We talked earlier about reimagining policing. As we hear the phrase bandied about defunding the police, I want to start with you, Wanda, please. What does that mean to you, defunding the police?
That term just means reallocating, reorganizing. I think the term has been corrupted because many want to think that Black folks do not want police. And that is not true. What they want to do is to be able to walk free and enjoy all the things of America like everybody else. And as you see, going back to what Michelle was saying, that even with everything that both chiefs have spoke about, which are good things, we still have the same thing. And when they say defunding, and I know with the police department, and it needs to be a redress, they have to deal with mental health. They have to deal with homelessness. They have to deal with all these things, and they are not, even though they get a couple hours training on that, but they're not the professionals in doing that. So with that, they're doing the best they can. But one thing I wanted to say with that, you can train the head, but you can't train the heart. And that's a hard thing. And what the police need to do and the officers need to do is start focusing on addressing more than arresting. So when they come to our community, and I think the only way that that's going to happen is through police community relations. That's how I got my start in policing 30 years ago. We had I'm from Miami, and we had the Arthur McDuffie riots, where this Black professional insurance guy riding his motorcycle, and he was killed by officers, and it caused a big riot. And at that time, they realized that they need police community relations. And that's how I was hired into the city of Miami as a community involvement specialist. And I was partnered with a police officer, and we had a certain segment of community in the community in the city of Miami, and we worked with that community. They knew us, the officers, the churches, the businesses, the schools, etc. And one of the things that they did, which might be an idea for both of the chiefs, they had community involvement, and they met with our police chief once a month to discuss whatever issues that were going on, from officers doing this, or we even had them to come in and do riding assignments. We had them, come in and do riding assignments. They were trained in the use of force. They went to the academy to see what the officers were doing. They also we trained them in conflict resolutions. So they bought in, and so therefore, for a long period of time, we didn't have those kind of issues. If an officer made a mistake of the head, at least the police understood. And the first thing the chief did was reached out to his community. So the information got back out to the community where people understood. And everybody in the officers in the department, it was a part of their, even when they went out for roll call, they knew the people in the community. If they ran into a problem, they knew they can go talk to Mr. Hall or Mrs. whomever, because these people were involved with the police department. And we had real good police community relations. So therefore, after if you can think, Miami has not had another riot because of police community relations. They took it serious, and it was a buy-in from the mayor, the police chief, and the culture was set, and the officers knew. And when these people spoke, and then the community, a lot of times when the community spoke about things that was happening, more than like a lot of times it was true. But they did something to work on it. And I hear you're saying this, and I'm encouraged that, that's where you are. I do feel encouraged with that.
Thank you, Wanda. Michelle, I see that you're nodding your head quite a bit. Your thoughts about defunding the police, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, so I've actually sat on strategy tables, national strategy tables, when it's come to the issue of defunding the police. And, you have folks who are all the way on the abolition side, and then you have folks who are like, absolutely not. When I talked to my parents, my mother's 75, she said, absolutely not. We need the police. And so, and I agree. And I think that to me, it is that reimagining piece, right? And so we've seen, like, Chief Holloway in St. Pete, what he's been able to do, and taking, not taking the $3.3 million from federal funds. He's saying, okay, listen, we're going to start a program called the Call Team. So if there are folks that are having, mental health challenges, maybe juvenile truancy issues, maybe also, homelessness issues, or even sometimes substance abuse issues, instead of sending out an officer, they're going to send out a social worker or a counselor. And, so I think that we have to reallocate those funds and know what's in the wheelhouse, but also work together. So, I mean, when I look at defunding the police, I'm not saying, I don't believe that we need to shut them down, because let me tell you, something happens at my house. If something happens in my home, I'm immediately calling law enforcement, because y'all are the ones who are trained to handle it. And so, and I don't think that we can't, and so that's not into disparage or say that we don't need them. But I think that also knowing, it's kind of like, Maya Angelou says, when you know better, you do better. So as we're getting more knowledge, we're doing better. And what I'm seeing and hearing is our law enforcement, chief law enforcement officers, when they're getting the knowledge, when they're getting the data, they're taking that and they're doing better, which is why you have, Chief Holloway in St. Pete saying, okay, listen, instead of getting more officers, we're going to divert to adding this call team. We're going to build in more training at all levels, not just at the initially in the academy, but we're going to make this, this training that they have to do when it comes to diversity and use of force, that this is something that you're continuously getting all the time. Also, reviewing, on a consistent basis, their use of force policy. So I think that for me, that is what I think when I'm hearing defunding. And I'm thinking that, some folks have said, why do law enforcement officers need, law enforcement departments need tanks and those kinds of things. Those are the hard conversations that we need to have, and looking at where those monies can be best to help and support the community, because then it kind of comes back to that community policing model, right? It comes back to pouring back in the community and having that circular relationship. And I don't think I hear either one of these chief law enforcement officers in their department saying, we don't want to have that, or not open to that. And to me, it gave me great hope when I saw, the protesters have been protesting in St. Pete for the last 2 to 3 months. And that Chief Holloway said, I hear you. And not only do I hear you, I'm actually going to implement some of the things that you are saying. That is what then gives community okay, you kind of trust it. Okay. That is how you start building those relationships.
Thank you. Chief DePino, when you hear defunding the police, you've talked about this a bit before, but tell us, where are you now on your interpretation of what that really means?
Yeah, of course, I'm against defunding the police, because there absolutely is a need. And I see what happens when you look at taking away police officers from organizations. It's the very people that have a need, people that are not making as much money and can't afford private security, are the ones that are going to lack the police safety and protection. So I'm against that in that philosophy. But I also understand where the defunding, where you want to take money to allocate towards things like mental health issues. And I will tell you that I've been trying for years to get a mobile crisis response team here for the city of Sarasota. And I'm finally in good talks with First Step and their leadership. And we're going to be working together to be able to put out mobile teams that the police will be there, because sometimes people that are suicidal or have mental health issues or addictions or issues can sometimes turn violent. So you want to make sure that there are officers there that are trained, that know how to safely deal with and de-escalate those situations when they can. You want to make sure that they're to protect the individuals that, as I heard, I think Wanda was saying, we need people that are trained to understand and recognize when people are in a crisis. You know, we send our officers to crisis response training, and we want to send all of our officers, and we're I think about 80% have attended that, which is really good, but it's not the same as a professional going forward. So I think it's just important to realize is that we still need equipment in order to be able to keep our community safe. And while our department doesn't have a tank or that type of equipment, we do have an armored vehicle that is for emergency response, to be able to help people. During the last storm, we were able to go into North Sarasota and rescue people that were caught in flooding. So we need that type of equipment. And you have to realize that law enforcement still has the first responder obligation to respond to terrorist attacks, or to active shooters at schools, and to different situations where people in the community are, and sometimes there are people that aren't looking out for the best interest of everybody else and want to harm people. So we need to be able to respond to protect people. But we also have to realize, and I'm going to quote Sir Walter Peel, and this is where I learned the philosophy of policing from, is that police are part of the community and the community is part of the police. And I'm not saying the exact terminology, but if we don't have the trust and the relationship with the community, that is where we actually get our power from. We need the community to trust us and to work with us, because I will tell you, I don't have enough police officers to be able to police every single problem that's going on in the community. I have to depend on and trust, and I do, the partnerships that we have within our community for us, because a lot of the community is going to police themselves. And I'm against over policing in the community. I like to look at deferred programs. We have several of them. TALA, Turn Your Life Around program, which takes women that have been prostitutes and helps them, defer them from going to jail. We have our drug market intervention program, which again takes people that are drug dealers committing felonies, but gives them an alternative so they don't get a criminal record and don't go to jail. We also do that with our homeless outreach, because people that are homeless are not criminals. They need to get a home. So we have resources to help them with that. And I'm actually working on a committee to do some restorative justice, because what I hope to do is to look at communities, and it'll heal communities. It's worked other places where when you have a suspect and a victim and you bring them together with a mediator, and nobody has to have a criminal record, and maybe you just have the young man that maybe broke the next door neighbor's flower pot, that they mow the lawn for a week, and then everybody's happy because the neighbor really doesn't want the young person to go to jail, and they just want to, and that's restorative justice. So I'm a big supporter of that. And looking at the other programs, which are I know that Colonel's talking also about, is procedural justice type programs, that where you don't have, people don't need to go to jail. If we can reduce the number of people going into jail and we help them get the education, economic opportunities, a lot of things that are, if you talk about it, it's like, that's really not a law enforcement job, but it has become our job. A lot of has been put on law enforcement in the years that in almost 35 years, I'm doing things now that I've never had the responsibility before, but it's been thrown upon law enforcement to handle many things that really are not law enforcement. Our job is supposed to be peace and good order, make sure people are driving the speed limit, not breaking the law. But we've expanded to now we're going into communities and we're counselors for families. We're trying to help marriages. We're trying to help kids that are going down the wrong path. We're now dealing with mental health issues, addictions issues, alcoholism, a lot of things, and including finding people jobs. That's become part of law enforcement's responsibility. So I think that funding needs to be put into programs so that we can help people within our community, because then it avoids people getting into the criminal justice system, which is my goal, crime prevention, as opposed to arrest and put people in jail.
Thank you for that. I'm going to come back to it, but I want to make sure that we have Colonel Hoffman to have an opportunity to respond also to the question about what does it mean to you to defund the police. Because one of the things I'm thinking I'm hearing out of that, Chief, you said you're not in favor of it, but then I also heard you talk about the responsibilities that officers have now, which to me seems like it may be the mishmash of what is out there being discussed in terms of this
Yes.
defunding. Many people are saying defunding means not zeroing out the budget, but shifting out, allocating resources to professionals. You mentioned the fact that officers are not trained necessarily to be psychologists or to be psychiatrists. So where does that fit into your interpretation of the defunding? I'm throwing this to you, Colonel Huffman.
Yes, thank you very much, Renee. And I'm watching the questions pop up there, so I wanted to kind of hit a couple of pitches here real quick. Somebody had mentioned.
But if you would please go to defunding the police, if you would please answer that for me.
So defunding the police, I agree with the chief. I would be the first one to say if there's somebody who can do some of these functions better or wants to step up to the plate and take the responsibility. But as the chief mentioned, I've been doing this for 31 years. 31 years ago, it was cops and robbers and we were chasing people around, and that's just not what this job is now. So I operate the Sarasota County Jail. When Sheriff Knight came into office in 2009, we had over 1,200 inmates in that jail. As of today, we're at 790, and we've added 4 very important pods in that jail that I would hate to see defunded, because these are the kind of things, if you look at the Campaign Zero and their 8 Can't Wait campaign, one of those things are the social injustices of how the money is being applied. And I think that's what some of the other panelists have talked about. Well, we have an addiction recovery pod, in fact, the first in the state of Florida in our jail. We have a veterans pod in our jail that deals specifically with veterans that are in there. We have a care pod, which stands for Collaborative Approach to Reintegration Through Education, which deals with mental health. Now you say, why is a jail dealing with mental health? Well, because as of today, according to my stats, I have 353 people in that jail that identify with some type of mental illness or have take medication for mental illness. So it's been put on the shoulders of law enforcement, to some of the points of your other panelists, and we're addressing it through this pod program. And lastly, we have a reentry pod. So all the folks that graduate from those other pods go to the reentry pod, and we help them with, as the chief mentioned, job skills, financial skills, interview skills, housing skills. And then we take it one step further. We've had this implemented for about 3 months now. We have 2 navigator positions. When you get released from jail, the navigators will assist you on the outside to make sure you make it to the doctor's appointment, the job interviews, to help you get the housing and all of those things. 30 years ago, if you would have told me that I have a 5-person homeless outreach team that is out there right now today driving people to Fort Myers to get a roof over their head, a family, I would have told you I can't believe that law enforcement has developed to that extent. So my only comment, Renee, to that is, if you're going to defund the police or have that discussion, let's make sure that we look at the individual agencies and what they are doing. Can NYPD peel off a few $1 million? Probably. But here at the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office, I have to go in and ask the Board of County Commissioners for a budget, and I have to show them that the money that we are taking is changing people's lives in the community. Otherwise, they shouldn't be funding me. So a quick example, the addiction recovery pod. I have 10 individuals that have graduated from that addiction recovery. I have more than that, but I want to give you 10. 10 of those individuals accounted for 191 arrests. So what does that mean? That means law enforcement. That means clerk of the court. That means judge. That means prosecutor. That means public defender. That means probation officer. So they've graduated the addiction recovery pod, went through the reentry pod, and now they're being assisted with our navigators. And they've been out 15 and a half months, roughly, those 10. There's been 1 single arrest of those 10 individuals. These programs work if you commit to it and you have employees like I do that are committed to it. So defunding, you can always have a conversation if you can do it better. I don't have any military vehicles whatsoever, not a Humvee, a Jeep, anything in my entire inventory. But what I do have are a lot of those programs that are being successful that would break my heart if I had those defunded, because they are changing people's lives. One of those 10 individuals is actually coming back and volunteering in our jail now in the recovery pod and helping women in the women's recovery pod. So I'm not against having a conversation, but let's look at where the money is going and whether or not we're getting our bang for our buck. We can have the debate about whether this is law enforcement's job, But right now, nobody else seems to want to step up to the plate. The chief has taken on homelessness. I've taken on homelessness. If you can find a better mousetrap, let's sit down and have a discussion. But we are changing people's lives, because I look at those reports monthly of people that we are getting out of the woods. This last week, an 8-year, 10-year, and 12-year homeless person now have a roof over their head, are reconnected with their family, getting Social Security, and are applying for jobs. So let's not defund it if we're taking a step backwards towards helping our citizens.
Colonel, if there was something that you feel that should be off the plate of the sheriff's office, what would that be?
Well, there's a debate about an expansion of our jail. It's been going on for 10 years. I hope I can leave here and never build a new jail, because I think if you build it, they will fill it. Let's find those alternative programs. And if the community could come together, and we're starting the debate right now, Renee, about a community corrections facility in lieu of a new jail, and that I may need some assistance in running that with professionals from the outside. I have very good program experts in my jail, but I couldn't run a facility that size without some outside expertise. And I would be willing to defer some of the mental health work or the PTSD issues that we're dealing with veterans. If another set of skilled individuals in the community would come into the facility that I would run and take on those responsibilities, I just want to give the best product for our citizens to help them change their lives. And if that means there's somebody else out there that can do it better, I'll give up that, and they can come in and do it, and I'll work in partnership with them.
Thank you for that response. Chief, if there was something that you feel should come off the table of your department, what would it be?
Well, I think homelessness would be the number one issue, but coming with homelessness also comes mental health issues and addictions issues. And so unfortunately, I'm saying three things. But those would be the things that I think need to come off of our plate. But right now, there is no one else that has the resources, the funding, the ability. And that's where I would like to see more funding go towards that, and having an organization outside of law enforcement handle it. But I will tell you, I'm pretty proud of how we're handling it. I also know how the sheriff's department's handling it. They're doing a good job. We're engaging with homeless. We're getting people housed every single day. It's I'm seeing an impact. And the thing is our methodology is, we know we're never going to end homelessness, because if we thought we would, there is no silver magic potion that we can end homelessness with. But what we did do is, every day we're doing is one person at a time. If we get one person at home, and I just talked with someone this morning, is getting an individual that's been on the street for years, they're going into housing shortly. And we're looking every single day to help people that way and get them the resources that they need. Because a lot of people on the road, that are homeless, have mental health issues and addictions issues, and they're having addictions issues because of the mental health issues. They're self-medicating. So we really need to have resources, places where people can go and get the help that they need, and also make it not a lot of money for them. I've had conversations with mothers that are like, I want to get my son or daughter into an addictions. I've got the money, I've got the insurance, but they don't have any room, or they can't get them in until tomorrow. So we need to do a better job as a society of finding places for people that need help to go, as opposed to jail.
Thank you for that. I'm going to ask each of you to just give us, if you would please, your 30-second spiel on where we need to go from here. Let's start with you, Wanda.
I think as communities across the nation, and also across the world, are now speaking out against racial injustice and inequity, we must summon our better angels, and implement initiatives that can be lifelong, that will really address the issues that are before us structurally. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to look at structurally. A new dawn has awakened. The entire world is not on the sideline anymore, recognizing the inequities we have now. And it's just unfortunate that it starts with law enforcement, but it spills out into the systemic racism that has been going on in this country. I'd say now that nobody's on the sideline with no more voyeurism. They know it, but they're looking from the outside. People are actually in with empathy and understanding, sharing the condition in the forefront. And I think
Thank you, Wanda. I'm sorry.
Well, I just think
We get in because I see that the
stakeholder.
that means it's time for us to wrap up. Michelle, 30 seconds, please. Where do we need to go from here? What's the next step?
Listen, I don't know if 30 seconds is going to be enough. An hour for this conversation wasn't enough. I think that we need to still keep having the tough conversations. We still need to keep actually implementing the tough solutions, and we need to have the lines of communication open, because I've always said that we have more in common than we have different, and we need to find that common ground. And I have to understand that this is a relationship with community and law enforcement. We're in a relationship whether we like it or not. So we better work to make this a really good relationship. And that comes from having these tough conversations and implementing the tough solutions.
Thank you. Chief, where do we need to go from here in 30 seconds?
Law enforcement needs to keep listening and engaging with the community and hearing what the concerns are and help address those issues. We also need to educate the community about what we do. We have a Citizens Academy. I encourage people to attend, and also use of force days. I encourage people to attend to learn about what police do and why they do that, so we all have better understanding of each other's what we need and what we want to do. And I'm committed to doing that, and I am available if anyone wants to reach out to me. My cell phone number is 941-780-2746. And I appreciate this opportunity. I want to continue to listen and be part of that progressive change we need.
Thank you. Colonel Hoffman, 30 seconds.
Sure. So I'll start with a word. Over policing. We didn't get a chance to talk about this, but I think a lot of these encounters that we have, Renee, and the situations that lead to them are situations where we didn't need to be in those communities and over policing. I know Wanda has an intelligence background. Our policing model here is intelligence to action. We're looking for the worst of the worst offenders. I'm spear fishing for my criminals. I'm not throwing a net over my entire community. I don't like it when I get stopped. I don't like it when my wife gets stopped. So I'm sure everybody else doesn't like that. So we should not be over policing our community first and foremost. The chief mentioned that we have got to engage on every single level. And sometimes it physically wears me out. Zoom meetings, parades, Saturdays, Sundays. I miss a lot of dinners. It's important that we be seen as law enforcement executives in the community. And the chief mentioned this document, but you need to really go and read it. It's President Barack Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force Report. You can see mine's kind of dog-eared and tabbed. I use this when I teach. And there's one word, if you take anything away from this document, it is legitimacy. If you don't have legitimacy in your community by what you're doing and you're holding yourself and your agency accountable, then you've lost it. There's a phrase in law enforcement: it's lawful, but it's awful. Just because we can do it doesn't mean that we should be doing it in many respects. So I appreciate the opportunity. We have just scratched the tip of the iceberg here. I've got so many other things to talk about, so I'll commit to come back. And it's like Chief DePino did, my cell phone number is 941-915-3185. Happy to speak to anybody that wants to engage on these topics.
Thank you all for those responses. We know that we could not solve it in next step in 30 seconds. I'm going to turn it over to you, Madam Judge, to close us out of this particular session. Unmute your mic.
Sorry. On behalf of the Sarasota County Bar Association and its Council for Diversity and Inclusion, we thank the viewers, the panelists, and the moderators for participating in this town hall. We hope you will attend our August 21st town hall at noon. Have a great day. Thank you very much.